The smallest roster in the NHL trying to play physical. It appears the Minnesota Wild have an organizational disconnect on their hands.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
Hey, this is Foligno, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we're going to talk about a little bit of a disconnect for the Minnesota Wild between their style of play and the roster they have, plus the draft strategy. It just seems like none of it kind of is funneling together towards a central vision. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, credentialed media member, bringing you credentialed access to the Minnesota Wild once again here in 2025-2026, and host of Seth on Sports as well. And this was honestly one of the better points that was made in the live show yesterday. Could not honestly, like it floored me. That it was something that I had not really considered much at all. But big props to John Robinson in Denny's show yesterday, saying essentially it just doesn't seem like the Minnesota Wild have a connect strategy or branding as to what like their mission statement is or their purpose or what they're trying to cultivate. It seems like the Wild roster is trying to get bigger and more physical, while the draft strategy is more on the speed and skill approach. It doesn't feel like anything is really lining up, which is leading to, I think, some major growing pains for this team that we have seen this year. But if you follow this team for the last few years, this is not a new problem. This is not a new this year problem. It's just a Minnesota Wild roster that is on the slow side, on the old side, and is on the small side. According to Elite Prospects, for this season, the Minnesota Wild are the smallest roster by average height in the league. They clock in at 6 foot on average. That is 32nd out of 32 teams. Now, as far as weight goes, the Minnesota Wild clock in at 20th out of 32 teams with the average weight of 198 pounds. And as far as age goes, the Minnesota Wild are the 12th oldest team in the NHL at an average age of 28.4 years. So they're all over the place. And this is something, especially on the size, this is something that we have pointed out, everydayers have pointed out consistently and frequently with this team, is especially on defense. You get to the postseason and you kind of get pushed around. You get moved around quite regularly when you are trying to defend in front of your net. This was the Dallas Stars. The Dallas Stars turned this into they turned this into a showing that honestly should have probably won an award, with the number of times that Wild players were just ragdolled in front of the net. But, you know, when you have an undersized roster, there's just really not a lot that you can do about it. And as far as the size goes, Joel Eriksson Ek and Marcus Foligno are arguably your two biggest forwards. Eriksson Ek, 6'3", 210. Marcus Foligno is 6'3", 230. But beyond that, you don't have a ton of size and oomph in that lineup from a forward perspective. Vladimir Tarasenko, 6'1", 219, but his game isn't predicated on, trying to move people around. Zach Bogosian, 6'3", 228. And Jake Middleton, 6'3", 220. You've got four guys that, have quote unquote size in the lineup. And that is widely regarded as the MO for Bill Guerin and this team. He wants to be a team that plays physical, plays with grit, just tries to make life miserable for the opponent. An opponent that is routinely faster. And honestly, we're getting to the point that a lot of these teams have players that are both big and skilled. And it feels like the Minnesota Wild go one or the other, whereas other teams tend to lean both. I find myself routinely going back to think of John Hines' quote after when he was asked if he thought the team was fragile. And he said he thought the team needed to get tougher. They needed to add a level of toughness and tenacity to their game that they weren't exhibiting. Battles in the corners, battles for the puck at other areas throughout the ice. And I should mention, too, Yakov Trenyan, 6'2", 214, another player that is leaned on for his size. But that's 5 players in your lineup, and they're not all out on the ice at the same time. Your scoring comes from 5'9" Marco Rossi. Now, it's not a dig at Marco Rossi by any stretch. He's just a smaller player. He has beefed up considerably over the last couple of seasons, and he's a very good player. He just runs on the small side. Kirill Kaprizov is 5'10". Matt Zuccarello is 5'8". Jared Spurgeon is 5'9". You have a lot of undersized players in this lineup, and that has seemed to be kind of a draft trend for this team over the last several seasons. Now, we'll talk about that more later in the episode, but it just feels like there's kind of a disconnect as to what this team needs to do, what this team is trying to do, and when the going gets tough, what is going to help the problem. So I'm going to dive into that. Coming up next is just the amount of times that Bill Guerin has thrown another cinder block into the boat to try to keep it afloat. Now imagine that visual and that picture. Throwing a cinder block into a boat and just continuing to do that to try to keep it afloat. But that's been the MO for Bill Guerin over pretty much his entire tenure as general manager. So we're just going to try to figure out what level, what should this team be doing? What should they be trying to accomplish when they draft, and what should they be trying to do on the ice? That's all coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. With Anthony Edwards out for the Minnesota Timberwolves, Julius Randle's been a safe bet for the last few games. And with Ant on his way to return, any live Anthony Edwards prop bets throughout the game are always they're a good bet to cash. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is also brought to you by Monarch. Let's be honest. Most of us can't even name all of our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it's easy to lose track, and that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why I switched to Monarch. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. And it's one singular app. No more juggling multiple apps to try to find your credit card statements, your bank statements, or your finances in general. Monarch does it all in one place. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We are up over 3,700 subscribers, so thank you to all of you that have continued to subscribe to the channel as we continue to navigate through already a rocky start to the season, and we'll see where it goes from here, but we will have you covered each step of the way. So let's talk a little bit about this, overall disconnect that we feel with this Minnesota Wild roster. So you've got Bill Guerin, who continues to kind of hammer on the need to play tougher, need to play bigger. He continues to to hammer that corner. Judd Brackett continues to draft players that have more speed, more skill, and run a little on the undersized route. Now, there have been some exceptions as far as drafting goes for the Minnesota Wild over the last few years. Now, the Wild have seemed to more consistently draft big defensemen. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But obviously, the 2023 draft, Charlie Stramel and Rasmus Kumpalainen, they both bring some size to the table. And you draft Riley Heidt in that same draft. Heidt, another undersized center forward, incredible playmaking and skill, but he is on the undersized route. Liam Ogren, a little on the beefier side, especially as he has kind of bulked up and worked into his frame. But if you look at the 2022 draft, Danila Yurov, another player who's kind of more on the thin side. Hunter Haight, another smaller player that was picked by the Minnesota Wild. If you go back to the 2021 draft, Carson Lambos, a little more of an undersized defenseman. It's a pattern with this team, and Marco Rossi and Murat Kuznetsov were the same way. A little on the undersized category with speed. So it just appears to be kind of a preference for Judd Brackett, and that has been kind of his calling card. But you look at this roster, like I look back to every time that the Minnesota Wild have been either in need of a jolt or have gotten close to the deadline. Like, think about the last handful of deadline acquisitions for the Minnesota Wild. You know, you go back a few seasons to the year that Marc-Andre Fleury was traded from Chicago. That same year, Capo Kakkonen was shipped out to the San Jose Sharks for Jake Middleton. Size. That same year, you bring in Nick Delorier. Size. The season after that, you get off to the rough start. You bring in Ryan Reeves. Size. This past season at the trade deadline, you bring in Justin Brazeau, who is big. It's not necessarily his game, but you try to plug him into that size hole. And so, like, you just continue to kind of have this fascination on size to complement undersized players in the skill department. I mean, you can certainly try to get both at the same time. Like, you're obviously not going to find players like Tage Thompson just laying around. But you look at a team in particular that I look at because it's the team that the Wild played in the postseason last year. The Vegas Golden Knights. They have plenty of size amongst their forwards, but it's players that can provide scoring as well. Tomas Hertl, 6'3", 220. He's a goal scorer. You look at the other parts of the lineup, especially on defense too. You've got pretty much all of your defensemen are 6'3" or 6'4". That's a big back end to have to try to play against. And the Wild had issues with that pretty much the entire series. But you've got Jack Eichel too, who is 6'2", over 200 pounds. Tomas Hertl, as we mentioned. Brett Howden is 6'2", 200 pounds. Brendan Saad is 6'1". He's over 200 pounds. Like, you get these guys that can give you both. They are bigger, and they can also give you scoring. Mark Stone, 6'3", 210. Like, I know we're splitting hairs and talking a couple of inches here and there, but you can do both. You can get both. You can get players that can give you scoring while also being a little more sized. Aleksander Barkov for the Florida Panthers, 6'3", 214. Sam Reinhart is over 6 feet tall. And again, we're nitpicking over a couple of inches. Sam Bennett is over 6 feet tall. Matthew Tkachuk is 6'2", 200. Like, you can find players that can bring you size and some scoring. Because right now, it's pretty much, with the exception of Joel Eriksson Ek, pretty much all of the size that the Minnesota Wild have is only contributing to size. They're not contributing in the goals department or anything along those lines. With the exception of Matt Boldy is listed as 6'2", 209. He's obviously contributing tremendously to the scoring. But like Marcus Foligno, 6'3", 230, no points. Zach Bogosian, not playing currently. Jake Middleton, 6'3". He's not contributing much offensively. Like, you can't afford to have a roster. I think this is the point that I have been trying to get to here. You can't have a roster that has one and the other. You got to find a way to mix. You got to find a way to mix and have both. Is I think where the disconnect comes in here. And with the team playing the way that they are right now, it's not going to shock me in the slightest if Bill Guerin breaks the glass and tries to add to the size department again. Pavel Zacha is a name that has been linked to the Minnesota Wild's at least initially. 6'4", 211. Now, he's a good player, too. He is one of those players that can do both from a scoring department. 2 goals so far this year, but he's got 12 points in 14 games. But again, like, he's between a 14 to 20 goal scorer. But that's Bill Guerin's calling card. That's his MO, is we have to, we got to double down on the size. Casey Middleton is another name that was mentioned. 6'1", 205. Like, you have to find players that can give you both, not one or the other. And it just seems like they continue to say, well, let's get the scoring from undersized players, and let's add the size to hit and not do anything else. So that is, one of the big questions that's been weighing on my mind here over the last couple of days. But I also want to talk about something else that was brought up on Judd's Hockey Show today that I think is spot on. What is the current identity of this Minnesota Wild team? Like, what are they hanging their hat on? What are they hanging their hat on? We'll attempt to answer that question as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Hockey season is officially here, and nothing beats being in the arena for those opening games. Let's be real. Getting tickets can be a total headache. Between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout, it's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your team. That's where Game Time comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NHL tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. My favorite part about Game Time is you actually save more the closer it gets to the event you're trying to go to. Yes, ticket prices actually go down as you get closer to your event. So if you ever have one of those spontaneous trips, you can save big. You can save plenty big on those tickets with Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying NHL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Just continuing with this overall disconnect notion, and I wanted to bring up something that I actually read in getting prepped up for this episode, and it's a banger of a quote from current Iowa Wild head coach Greg Cronin. The quote is, the more you challenge yourself, the more profound of an understanding you have of yourself. And there's a follow-up to that quote. A lot of people don't like a hard challenge. They don't want that mini journey. It can be painful and usually doesn't have that immediate gratification. And we saw last year, the Minnesota Wild went with the choose your hard moniker for kind of their overall mission statement for the season. Their calling card is, it's not easy to win at the NHL level, which is right. And you have to be willing to dig in and do everything that is necessary in order to do so, which is also not wrong. But we saw that as kind of the rallying cry last year. But let's also consider like what that means for this team. You have to be willing to dig in and do all the other little things because, offense, not great at scoring. And it's a roster that is mostly slow and mostly, underskilled, undersized. And that's been something that I just have wrestled with the whole season so far, is because we've heard John Hines talk about it. Like, we got to get back to our identity. And as far as I can tell, the identity is working hard, battling along the boards, doing the little extra to win puck battles. That's not an identity. Like, that is just something that you should do on a nightly basis. So, as far as I can tell, the Minnesota Wild identity is, at this point, hopefully Kirill Kaprizov has a good night. Which is not a great identity, but, when we go back to 2021, 2022, the Wild's, their identity was, it wasn't anything that was stated, but it was torrential pressure. They killed teams in 5-on-5, just annihilated teams in 5-on-5 scoring because they had multiple lines that could make your life miserable. That was their calling card. When the penalty kill gave up a couple goals, when the goaltending got shelled, they had the pressure to be able to withstand that. And that season also featured empty net magic. The 6-on-5 goals, not sustainable, as we came to find out. But it was a fun kind of this team has the offense to be able to go toe-to-toe against anybody. And we saw how that went in the postseason. But ever since, Dean Evason's quote, grit first, love it or hate it. At least it was something. I don't feel like this team has any sort of we're going to dig in. We're going to play really good defense. We're going to get really good goaltending. At this point, it's like we just have to kind of see which of the three is going to be okay and which of the three, offense, defense, which of the four, I guess, offense, defense, special teams, goaltending, which of the four is going to be really bad. And that's, if the offense is bad, you got to tighten up on defense and goaltending. If the defense is bad, you got to get going on offense or special teams. That feels like the identity for this team. And that's not a great method for success. That's not a great MO for successful performance. But again, it just, I think, comes down to this overall arc. There just is there doesn't seem to be any sort of connection as to okay, we're drafting players to fit this system. We're going to plug them into these different spots, maximize their talent, and, keep this thing humming. It just feels like Bill Guerin is just throwing cinder blocks into a boat. And then you look and you see water in the bottom of it, and you're like, it's a boat. It should float. It shouldn't sink. Well, I don't know what to expect when you just keep hucking size in that can't score. You get what you pay for. So it is a question that I think bears much bigger deep dives as the season goes on. Because I think it's pretty evident that there just doesn't seem to be a lot of like, hey, let's get everybody rowing in the same direction. Let's get everybody moving the same way. Doesn't seem to be a lot of that going on at this current moment. But that is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. We'll have Alex on tomorrow. Again, my schedule just did not cooperate. So we'll have him on tomorrow's show for a Victory McLetty Tuesday. We'll talk about the win against the Canucks and the new celebration prop after wins. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.